Thanks, Rachel. Good morning. We're going to spend a bit of time looking at the last question of our Easter series. Before we jump into that, for those of you in our youth program, years 5 and up, there is a sheet for you, and it's up the back, and you have an opportunity now to stretch your legs and go up there and grab that. So if you want to do that right now, go up the back. Susie and Miles are there. They've got it. Miles has a bundle of pens. Grab that. It's got some questions in it that relate to what we're talking about this morning. And we'll go through this question that we're looking at today. Is Jesus' offer desirable? We've spent coming into Easter and now finishing this series thinking about the question, is Easter unbelievable? And we've actually been following a little book put out by a woman called Rebecca McLaughlin. She's a PhD, really brilliant, and a really concise little summary of kind of the questions about Easter, and we've been following that through. And I found it really helpful to unpack some of that as we've processed this. And so we wanted to continue and finish the series at the end of this one last question, is Jesus' offer desirable? As we think about that, and as I've looked at this series, I've immersed myself a little bit more into kind of skeptics' questions and try to understand a bit more where people are coming from and the different questions people have about Christianity. And we've said this whole way through the series that there's so much that could be said, and we have very limited time here unpacking this. And so two things I want to say. One is Rebecca McLaughlin's book has more in it than what we've talked about, and that's a great thing, really easily digestible. Number two is our Alpha course. Is a great place to unpack these questions in a really thought out, systematic way. And so I want to encourage you in both those. But we're going to unpack some of it. And as I've looked at skeptics' ideas, something that kind of jumps out to me is just how much comedians are in that space of social commentary, particularly I think more so recently. There was a time where like situational humour was kind of the situational observation was the go-to for stand-up comics, but I feel like we've moved to situational commentary where comedics want to say more than just a joke or something they've observed, but they actually want to speak into and offer commentary on life. And so we get this, it's funny because it's true kind of humour, goes one step further of starting to say, oh, maybe that is true, let's think about that. And that's been true of skeptics, particularly those that have come out of Christian traditions and want to speak into that space. And people have found some of this space really refreshing. People who will just speak plainly about what they think. Ricky Gervais is one of those guys that says he's an atheist and just wants to speak plainly about what he thinks of religion. His series, Afterlife, spends a bit of time doing that. And so he's really outspoken on what he thinks about the offer of religion, what religion has to offer, and specifically what he thinks about the meaning of life. Back in 2019, he was interviewed for 60 Minutes. He was in Australia, interviewed with 60 Minutes, and he was asked these questions about the meaning of life. And he said the same answers. You hear him say these kinds of answers all the time. Like he says, why are we here? Well, we just are, is Gervais's answer. He says, there's loads of reasons you can say why we're here, and it's really what you do with it. To eat and drink and make friends and have fun and earn. That's Gervais's main idea of what the meaning of life is. It's just, we're here, do it, and do it the best you can. That's the goal. Others like him will agree. Jimmy Carr put out a book called Before and Laughter, where he kind of tells his story of his career, but also what he believes is wrapped up in there. And he says, I've got one life, and this is it. And we're in it right now. And there isn't a second to waste. Let's do this. What are we doing? Well, what's exciting? What's fun? And as you think about that, I mean, there's something quite inspiring and interesting about that, isn't there? Like, let's make life the most we can make it. Let's enjoy life the most we can enjoy it. Let's do life the best we can do it. That's certainly, there's inspiring ideas as Jimmy Carr talks about his success and striving for success. Let's make life about just, rising to the challenge and doing everything we can do the best we can. And it seems like it is an interesting idea. It's an attractive idea to make life the best we can make it. It does feel at times like some of those answers feel like the luxury of those that seem to be living a good life. Like if life is about living a good life, then if you're winning at life, maybe that's an easier thing to say. Certainly the rich and wealthy seem to have that luxury to say that maybe more than others. I heard one comedian, Neil Brennan, kind of make the joke about that atheism is really the luxury of white privilege, is his argument. He's a white guy, and he says atheism is really like the height of white privilege. It's like religion says, can we offer you an afterlife? And white privilege says, no thanks. How much better can it be than the life I'm already living? How much more can there be to offer? He says, I'll just take my supplements and see what happens. There's some truth in that, right? There's some truth in the more wealthy, more prosperous, more in control of our life, which is a big thing that technology and civilization has given us. The more of that, the more likely we are to say, let's make this all about our life. Now, to be fair, the same criticism has to be given to distortions of Christianity. Those that say, come to Jesus and you'll be wealthy and prosperous and all your problems will be solved. Once again, that's easy for people who are in wealthy, prosperous countries to proclaim that and even be testimonies to that, so witnesses of that. Say, that was what it was for me. I followed Jesus and I'm rich. It's easy for rich people to say that, and that comes with distortions of Christianity as well. But there's parts of it that aren't fully satisfying as an answer, are there? What about, the obvious question is, what about death? If life is about life, then what do we do with death? Gervais is very frank about it. He says, I don't worry about being dead. He does acknowledge that he worries about dying and what that painful and that sort of thing, but he says, I don't worry about death. He says, you don't know about it. That's the best thing about being dead. You don't know, you're dead. He says, he acknowledges, it is really difficult for others when you're dead. He says, it's a bit like being stupid. You don't know about it, and it's only difficult for everyone else, is Gervais's commentary. And many would agree with that kind of frank talk about death. Many would say it's really, really refreshing to have someone just say it how it is. And others would say it actually increases their value of life. The mortality we face increases how much we value life when we know that it's limited. But then there's other questions as well about what do we do with suffering in this world? What do we do when we hit a place where we're not winning at life? I feel like some of Gervais's answers to that are very, very dark. He says, when you're more unhappy than happy, there's something wrong, and you've got to do something about it. Now, once again, I would question if that comes out of a space of civilization where we feel like we have quite a lot of control of our lives, and not everyone is in that space in the same way. But I think Gervais gets much darker than that, because he says, and if I stop enjoying life, or I have low quality of life, or I'm in pain, well, I'll pop into a chemist and I'll take a pill. Hopefully it'll be available by then. His implication is that he will end it. That's his answer to ultimate suffering. Now, Gervais has been incredibly applauded for his raw honesty in that space, not trying to soften the blow, not trying to placate things by trying to say something that he doesn't believe. He's been honest about what he believes, and there's something really refreshing about that. I agree, and there's something great about this idea of wanting to make the most of our life, and yet I find it quite limited in its scope of answering the questions of life and meaning. And so we want to ask this question: is Jesus' offer desirable? Because I think as we look at it, what we will find as we unpack Christianity is that the answer Jesus gives us more hope than any other option. It gives us more meaning than anything else. And I think it gives us more joy. And I think it goes a long way to answering some of those difficult questions about suffering. So I want to unpack that. I'm going to start in, I think, what is the most obvious place and answer that question about death. I think it's the place that people assume this is what Christianity has the one answer for, or religion in general tries to answer. Jesus offers life beyond death. That is what we read in that passage. I mean, as Rachel said, it's a pretty well-known story of Jesus raising Lazarus, and he uses this line. He says to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die." It's one of our go-to passages when we run funerals, because it is this hope beyond death. It's the claim of all religions. It's the claim of Christianity that there is an offer beyond life. But Jesus doesn't just say, "I give an offer of life beyond death." Right? Jesus doesn't just say, "I give resurrection and life." Jesus says, "I am resurrection and life." And that comes with some implications. To unpack that a bit, I want to use an illustration similar. We've talked about this before. This is an illustration Miles will like. It's an illustration using KFC. I don't know how much you know the story of KFC, the Colonel. Harlan Sanders' rise to success was difficult, and it wasn't that straightforward. He ran a restaurant that sold chicken in Kentucky. I mean, that's the story. He had early success when he had a gun shootout with his main competitor, and unfortunately his competitor shot someone else accidentally. They died. He went to prison for murder, and Harlan Sanders suddenly had a monopoly on the restaurant market in his town. So huge kind of jump forward, but that's not the end of it. A real struggle as the highway shifted past his town. His restaurant started to die. But one thing he did, he sold his secret recipe to another shop outside of Kentucky, which of course called that chicken Kentucky Fried Chicken, not actually Sanders' name. It was someone else, but he saw the success of that. And so, really struggling, he moved kind of into his car, lived out of his car for a while, and started travelling around in his 60s, travelling around to shops, selling his recipe as a franchise, which started to evolve into a restaurant franchise. Now, I tell the story because as we think about what we see as KFC now, it's inseparable from Colonel Sanders, right? Made Colonel because his mate, the mayor, just declared him a colonel. That's something you can do in the southern states. Can't do anywhere else in the world, I think, is just declare someone a colonel. He was made Colonel Sanders. It's inseparable from KFC. And if he is to say, "I am KFC," we know what that means, right? We don't think, if he says, "I am Kentucky Fried Chicken," we don't think that means he is a chicken, fried or otherwise, from Kentucky or otherwise. He is KFC means, well, without him, there is no KFC. We know that's what it means. And that is the similar thing that we see when we see this claim of Jesus saying, "I am resurrection and life." There's an exclusivity to it. Without Jesus, he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." Without him, there is no resurrection and life. That is the claim that Jesus gives. But it's not purely an exclusive claim. He says, "Anyone who comes to me will receive this life." But that's not all he says. He says, "And whoever believes in me will never die." His line is not just exclusive, it's also inclusive because it's invitational. There's an invitational invite in this offer. And so he asks Martha, do you believe this? The invitation is to her, but the invitation is to all. And so Jesus says, I am the resurrection, and the life is an exclusive claim that has an inclusive invitation. But it's more than just saying, Jesus is meaning more than just saying, without me there is no resurrection and life. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, we know that there's more than that. Like Colonel Sanders, it's not just it's without him, he actually represents it. He embodies KFC. And the same thing is true as we think about Jesus as the resurrection and life. He embodies what it means to be resurrection and life. And we think about some of that at Easter. But he's also not just saying, I am life beyond death. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he's saying, I am life beyond life. Right? Jesus' identity is in life, and Jesus is saying life is identified in him. Let me put it like this. This is what Rebecca McLaughlin says in her book. She says, the claim here is unbelievable. Jesus is declaring that he's not just someone who can bring dead people back to life. He's claiming that relationship with him is what it means to be alive. Jesus doesn't just bring life beyond death. Jesus is life beyond life. That is, he is a true, fulfilling life beyond the limitations of this life. He is life beyond life. What that means is, the answer to is Jesus' offer desirable hinges on who Jesus is, and whether you see that offer as desirable or not hinges on who you accept and believe Jesus to be. The Christian faith hinges on trust in Jesus, who he is, who he said he was, and what he did, that he did what he said he was going to do. That is where this whole claim hinges. And let me give you 4 implications to what I think this means for us. The first one is, if we think about life beyond death, if Jesus is life beyond life, the implication is that life eternal is more unimaginable than we can fathom. This is what happens when, whenever there's kind of funerals, and I see this often at funerals, there's this desire to kind of think about our loved ones and what it means for them to be living beyond the grave. And we kind of translate that into poetic thoughts and ideas that are nice feelings. It feels like sometimes they slip very quickly into quite airy-fairy ideals. Even for Christians, it seems like we slip quickly into poems about playing harps and having wings. Like that seems like this slip of what it means to be beyond the grave. That is not the picture the Bible gives us on what life beyond this life looks like. The picture that the Bible gives us is Jesus. That is the picture. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. That means that life beyond the grave is Jesus and is with Jesus. That is the most significant component of it. In McLaughlin's book, she tells a story about a friend of hers, Grace, who had lost her husband 10 years prior to this. And she talks about, she's having coffee with this friend, talking about some of that. And her friend Grace shares a story about talking to her daughter about it. And she said that her daughter said, heaven is the place where we will see Papa again. And that's a nice hope that she has for heaven. But this is what Grace says with her hope set in Jesus. She says to her daughter, I think we are setting our sights too low, she says. This is McLaughlin's paraphrasing of that conversation. She says, Grace loved her husband dearly, and she'd love to be with him again. But as Grace walks into the arms of death, she knows she's walking first and foremost into the arms of Jesus. The best experience of love she's ever felt. That is the tangible picture we get of heaven. It's a tangible picture we get of life beyond this life. And it comes down to who Jesus is and who we see him as, because the claim of Christianity is that Jesus is God, the loving creator who made everything that we love, who is himself, the Bible says, is himself love. That is the picture. And so life beyond the grave is Jesus, that loving God, finding ourselves in him and coming to fathom what an afterlife looks like is anchored in that space. So that's the first implication. The first implication of Jesus being life beyond life is that the afterlife is more unimaginable than we can think. It also means that eternal judgment is more understandable, I think. Now, don't get me wrong. The concept of judgment is eternal consequences is a difficult one. I find it difficult. I find it difficult to wrap my head around it. And there's questions that I think make us uncomfortable about how can a loving God allow that to happen. But I think understanding and anchoring the fact that Jesus is life beyond life answers a little that question, helps us understand that further. Because if heaven is Jesus, then the answer is hell is no Jesus. If heaven is unity with God, then hell is disconnection from God. And there's many that would happily resonate with that and say, fine, I don't believe in God anyway. Happy to be done with him. It'll be nice to have it over and not have to talk about him anymore. But the problem with that is that just as heaven is more unimaginable than we can fathom, the idea of no God, disconnected from everything that is good, is more torment than we can imagine. And that is why the Bible uses pictures of torment, of the lake of fire and eternal torment. Because that's the idea that everything we love comes from God. What does it look like to have no God? Literally, not no idea of God, not no belief in God, but nothing from him. And I often find it helpful to see the idea that those that reject God one day get their own wish. They will have no God. That is, in part, what judgment itself is. And so understanding Jesus' life beyond life gives us a slight clearer picture into that. It also makes life now even more meaningful. Because the claim of Christianity is that we believe in a resurrected Jesus. That is what we just celebrated at Easter. And therefore, Jesus' life beyond life means life with him now. The Christian claim is there is a divine creator, and he is living and active in our world today, and he desires relationship with us. And this isn't something we just wait for an afterlife. It's something that we can embrace here and now. I'll come back to that in conclusion. I want to tackle the fourth implication, I think, of the idea that Jesus is life beyond life. And that is, I think it gives a better answer to suffering. Now, it is a difficult question, the question of how does a loving God allow suffering? It's a question that I think many different spaces struggle to answer. I'm not convinced atheism has a good answer to that. I'm not convinced science by itself, atheistic science in particular, has an answer to that. I think, ideas like humanism ends up saying if humans are the pinnacle of everything and that's what life is about, then why is it that humans create the worst suffering of all? I mean, humans are the greatest cause of suffering in our world. And so there's not an answer there. It's very difficult. As I explored this and rethought some of these questions, it brought me back to a guy called John Lennox. I don't know if you've heard John Lennox speak before. He's a brilliant mind. He's a Christian, brilliant mind. He's a mathematician, which he's much more engaging than that sounds. I mean, no offence to mathematicians, but he's more engaging than it sounds. I'm going to show you a quick clip, 3 minutes long, of, this is John Lennox. He's in a debate with another guy, and you'll see the other guy, but the video doesn't have him talking. The question he's given is, how can a good God allow suffering? And this is his answer.
I think about this a lot because I find it's the hardest question for any of us. There's no two ways about it. First of all, it seems to me atheism doesn't solve it. It solves it in an intellectual sense, that people say, like Dawkins, the universe is just like you'd expect it to be. When at bottom there's no good, no evil, no justice, and we just have to face it. Well, if that is correct, of course, it means you've solved the problem. You've removed it in some sense, but what you haven't removed is the suffering and the pain. So I find that philosophically a disaster. But now, in order to respond to it as a Christian, I have to come down to the heart of the Christian faith. And this is the very short answer. At the heart of the Christian faith there stands a cross. And if that really is God there, then it tells me that God hasn't remained distant from this problem, but has himself become part of it. And the cross and the resurrection together seem to me to do what atheism's solution to this problem doesn't do. They give us grounds for hope. And I face a universe, as Michael does, that presents a mixed picture. It's like a ruined cathedral, Coventry Cathedral. You can see traces of beauty and you can see the marks of bombs. I call it beauty and barbed wire. And whatever our philosophy is or our worldview, we have to cope with that because that's the reality. And the only way that I can see a window into it, I can't solve it, I wouldn't pretend to, or insult anybody's suffering by so doing. I've been to Auschwitz many times and wept every time. But I would say this, we will never solve the problem philosophically of what a good God should, would, might, could, etc. have done. So we've got a problem. And as a mathematician, if you can't solve one problem, you ask a different one. And the different question for me is, granted that it's like that, is there anywhere in the universe evidence that there's a God that we could trust with it? And I believe there is, as revealed in Jesus Christ. That's my short answer.
Lennox's answer comes back to, I think, the claim that we've been talking about, that Jesus is central to this question, and identifying Jesus as the resurrection and the life, and placing Jesus' message of the cross and resurrection at the heart of the question helps us lean towards an answer in seeking to understand some of these questions of life. And so I think it means that the identity of Jesus, who he is and what he did, is what hinges this question. Is Jesus' offer desirable? And the answer is going to be whether we can come to trust in Jesus. See him for who he says he was, that he did what he said he would do, and that he offers an invitation that is an inclusive invite to anyone who would put their trust in him. I want to finish with another comment that Lennox made as he wrestles with particularly thinking about proof of faith, proof of belief in God. One of the things he says is the claim that people make is that there's no way for us to test the way we, and I said this last week on Easter Sunday, we have come to gain much knowledge about our world through testable and measurable experiments. We gain truth by what we can test and measure. And the claim often is that Christianity isn't got a test or measurable kind of component. Lennox makes the point that he thinks it does. In fact, the big claim for him is that many Christians have experienced the offer of Jesus. he says, he says there's a number, but he names the one. He says at the center of the Christian faith is this offer that Jesus is the bringer of peace, that those that put their trust in him receive his forgiveness, and that there's a releasing in our lives of that, of putting our trust in Jesus. And so that is entirely testable, because people can do it and experience it. And many have done it and experienced it. And I know many in this room have experienced that from God. And so in that sense, it's difficult to test if you're a skeptic. If you're not ready to put your trust in God, you're not going to experience that. But for those that do, there is an experience that people have in that space, that God does bring life in a way that Jesus speaks about it. And so in kind of concluding, we've been talking a lot about our Alpha course, and we've been pointing a lot towards that. And I still want to say, as we finish this series, there's going to be one of the best places to unpack more of these questions. Think about that more. And so I want to finish with a video, a story. We watched this last year. It's a story from Alpha. There's lots of them, but I think this one's helpful as we think about the experience of coming to Christ and how that happened through Alpha. And this is going to be the end of the sermon. We'll watch this video. The band will get up at the end of the video and we'll continue our service. So let's watch the video.
When we get here, everything was a mess for us. I start suffering a lot of depression, and I thought a lot of taking my life. I leave my family for a couple of months. I start drinking a lot of pills. I remember it was 22 pills per day, suffering more than 10 panic attacks per day. Everybody in my family was falling apart, my daughter, my son, my wife. The family was a mess.
My parents coming here, it actually felt quite difficult because it almost the roles shifted. They didn't know the language, they were immigrants. I was in a very unhealthy place myself, and then I had to kind of step up and be almost like their mom. Through that, also seeing my dad go from being my hero to being a broken person. And he would say things like, I hate you guys, I don't want to be with you.
A friend of mine, he invited me to the church. At that point, I didn't go to any church. I didn't believe in God. I just was lost. And I went to the church on Sunday and I heard about Alpha. And this friend invited me to Alpha the following Monday, and we came to Alpha together. It was a fantastic experience. And when I came to Alpha, everything changed in my life.
I clearly remember the day that my dad came home and said, I've been doing this thing called Alpha, and I thought, that's crazy. My dad is doing something at a church. I couldn't deny the fact that my dad had changed so radically. I remember when he asked me to come to Alpha, he said, you'll meet people that will be healthy and good for you. And when he said that, I kind of thought, yeah, that's what I need. I need good friends. I need healthy friends. The first night, I just remember being they're all overly friendly, but they're so good. If this is true, I'm never leaving this place. During the last talk, I just remember saying okay, God, I have all this stuff that I'm doing. I just want you to take it all away. I don't want it anymore. I just want to follow you. I just want to do everything I can to please you and to bring people to know you. And I just felt this this strength that I never had before to quit drinking. And then shortly after, the day after, I stopped smoking. And the weekend after, I got baptized.
I knew that feeling, and I was so happy because she got it. She got the idea. She was extremely happy. It's the happiness that you're never gonna see before.
I am super thankful that you invited me to Alpha Dad. Thank you. It changed my life.
You're welcome.
Like it changed everything for me. Thank you.
Was it me?